the world was built by people no smarter than you. Building a business is being a business of like problem solving. You're gonna have all sorts of issues. You're gonna deal with things, be put in scenarios that you didn't anticipate, and you have to figure it out. When you think about like building a business, you learn pretty quickly that the biggest battle of a startup is people not caring.
You guys ran into a little bit of a problem, some cease and desist letters, and
yes,
you've had all this growth, you're feeling great, and then that's probably like a oh shit moment when you dropped revenue potentially 80% overnight.
You're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm here with Eric, founder of Ramp, hosting me at his beautiful New York office. Thank you so much for allowing me to take away your precious time. I want to talk to you a little bit about your founder journey, man. How it's been? How'd you got here?
Oh my God, it's well, like it got out of bed. But no, I'm kidding. No, thank you so much for honestly flying and being here in New York City. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, thank you. No, thanks for hosting me. It's I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully the listeners can get a lot of value out of it. I know I did just doing the research, so this is going to be fun. I want to start off by talking about Vegas. So your dad, a doctor, right? He moves to Vegas. Mm-hmm. What was that like growing up there for 18 years? I know there was a lot of expansion during your, when you grew up there. So what was that like?
So I was born in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
I look back and I think there was about 500,000 people, something like that, in Las Vegas area. When I left for college, there was about 2 million.
It's insane.
And so a lot of my memory of just growing up there was...
Oh, there's more people.
There was more people. There was new parts of town all the time. Yeah. And no one was quite from there, which was interesting. You felt like you got to know something about the world. You met people from all the way around the world. And, I didn't realize how unusual it was then, but cousins would visit, family, everyone wanted a reason to come into Las Vegas. But in many ways... there was parts when I, left for college and came back, I realized I had a bit of a weird childhood. You feel like home and you hear the ringing of the slot machines and you see ads for, people in very little clothing on billboards and there's things that are unusual. But, there was, I think when I look back my childhood and just one of the things that I remember that I later realized was very different was, you could meet people who built things. I didn't know necessarily a lot of people who built the casinos and the new malls and construction, but that was a normal thing for people to do, right. Which, I don't know that every other, growing up in other places, that's normal, but that stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any other cities that grow that quickly in that short of a time span.
Sure. For sure.
Your first job, you started working at Express. Talk to me about that experience, and then we can sort of relate that into, you going to college. But talk to me about Express.
Yeah, 100%. So, it has evolved quite a bit since then, but one of these early kind of fast fashion brands, very basic stuff. And I liked it because I could make, $8.50 an hour, something like that. And when you're 18, that makes a big difference. And I liked it. I actually think anyone, wants to build anything. I think working at some part of service is there's no replacement for it, whether it's a restaurant or selling clothes or something, but you meet all kinds of people. Some you normally encounter, many you wouldn't. Right. And your job is to, help them have a great experience, buy clothes that they're going to fall in love with. And it turns out selling is not as easy as you think. And so you learn a lot.
Please buy this.
Please buy this thing. Please, I really need this job. Yeah. So you learn a lot about just how to relate to, be kind to all sorts of people. Yeah. But once you get kind of the basics, how to be good at sales and all that, you start to, you're in a store for 8 hours, or more a day. And you start to notice little things. It made a pretty big impact in my life later on, but something that I always remembered was, Express was known for its sales. You come in on Friday, 20% off everything in the store. Right. Great. You're going to buy stuff. Monday rolls around. Now, for dress shirts, buy 2 shirts, get the third one free. Wednesday rolls around, 30% off, all that. There wasn't a single person who went to Express who didn't feel like they were getting a great deal. Right. But the strange part was, I remember it was a small amount, maybe 1%, 0.5%. Sometimes people would come by. I remember seeing them on Friday and then be back on Wednesday. And they'd say that these shirts that I bought, they're now more on sale because of the difference in price, and we were happy to do that. And so I think as an American, normally you grow up, you're not used to negotiating for things, maybe considered a little bit rude. Yeah. But I woke up pretty early on to the price of things is maybe a little bit more negotiable than you think. And
Right.
people try to get you to feel that you're getting a deal all the time. Not always the case,
Right.
which related to later stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's super interesting that you even picked up on that. When I was 18, I was working at like a pool shop. I was like, this is great. I'm getting paid to do not much work.
Yeah. That sounds fun.
But so that's really interesting. I think the fact that you're noticing that, right? Like the feeling of the selling experience and the feeling of the customer wasn't necessarily always the truth. And, the pricing was maybe a bit more malleable than they knew. That's fascinating. You grew up in Vegas. You then go to Harvard to go study computer science. I want to talk to you about meeting Kareem. I think that's amazing. And then also China, because I think it's very interesting how fascinated you were with China at such a young age. So take that a little bit where you will. But I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about there.
So I went to college in 2008, and there were some context that it's particular to me. So first, like Vegas at the time was one of the centers of the financial crisis
Right.
In the United States, the mortgage crisis, all that kind of stuff. And so when I left for college, things were like not great at home. But one of the bright spots in Las Vegas that people talked about a lot was, all of the large operators, Las Vegas Sands, when they were opening these new casinos in Macau, in China, and Singapore. And people couldn't believe how well they were doing.
Right.
And it seemed like the center of business was moving towards there.
Right.
On top of that, the Olympics had just finished in Beijing.
Yep.
And the World Fair was coming up. And so is someone who I think was coming to college and starting to think about, wow, I'm going to need to, you just were getting paid $8.50 an hour. You learn the value of money. You start thinking about what could you do that would be really valuable in the future. And it felt like, I should learn about that. On top of that too, I was lucky that person who lived across the hall from me, his name was Jin, and he was from Beijing. And I remember just an early meal that I had, which had a pretty big effect on me. It was just the two of us, and it was right before we'd selected classes, and we talked about typical freshman stuff. Who are you? Where are you from? All the basics. But he'd said something almost offhand of, I just want to learn something I could never learn at home. And he kind of gave his version of that. And I said, I'd left the country like once, maybe to go to Canada. I'd never gone abroad. And I said, maybe I should learn Chinese. Maybe I'll try that. And he was so sincere about it. Like he said, look, if you try it out and study it, I'll practice with you and help you learn it. And, if you don't go and take it, I'll go into practice, then I'll forget. I said, okay, sure. And just tried it. And it kind of kicked my ass. It was incredibly hard. I don't think I have a knack for language, but stuck at it. Went out there for a summer, and what I felt in Las Vegas was just on absolute steroids. I mean, China was growing so rapidly, and it just was different. It was fascinating. It felt like high energy, and so I just fell in love with the place. And I ended up studying Chinese for all 4 years. Basically, went back every summer and lived there for almost 2 years. So that was some of the context.
Yeah.
It relates to how I met Kareem. So one of the people who I get to be very good friends with was someone named Thomas, and he was Brazilian, very good at Mandarin, and we'd spent like a summer together out there. And so I was catching up with him. I think it was like winter of 2010, 2011, something like that, back at Harvard. And I didn't know them, but one of his roommates was Kareem. So he was the connection. Being from Vegas, I didn't know how to deal with cold weather. And this room is warm. Even now, I'm like, I like to wear a lot of it, get cold easily, I guess. But at the time, Kareem and I, like learned later, had very similar logic. He was from Beirut, Lebanon, which is also pretty warm.
Yeah.
And before we came to campus, I looked for the absolute warmest jacket I could find. At the time, Google would tell you should buy a Canada Goose, and
Right.
It's not the luxury brand it is now. It actually just French Canadians bought it because it would keep people warm. And so we bought those, and no one else really bought this kind of jacket. So one day I'm out with Thomas in the middle of winter, and it's European. Hate to say, I was having cigarettes, so I was like, oh sure, I'll have one. And someone comes over to speak French to me, and I don't speak French.
I'm trying to learn Mandarin. Come on.
It's like, that is not the language. No. And Turned out it was he spoke to me because he thought I must have been French.
Yeah,
Because
only people
from Quebec were by this thing. So
Yeah.
we hit it off, became friends, and that was it. And it kind of went. I mean, later that year he couldn't get an internship. He was on a visa. Most American companies wouldn't hire him.
Yep. Big mistake for them.
It's unfortunately, but we were doing a lot of work with the World Fair at the time, from friends, everything I had, and volunteer stuff in China, and so was able to get Kareem on a trip where he went and represented Harvard at the World Fair. Just like different fun, random stuff where we get to know each other over summers, all that kind of stuff. And so that was how I met Kareem.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, I think that the question you got asked, or the question that the guy across from the hall, like, I want to learn something that I can't, learn anywhere else. I think that's a fascinating framing. I want to touch on this. This is something that's just come up. Is there anything else, like, during those interactions with Kareem, or like, anyone else you met at Harvard, or during your time in China, where you got sort of another question or a frame opening thing where it's like, oh, I can actually do this, or this is something I can explore during that time? Or because I feel like a lot of people go to college, they're sort of there for 4 years, and that they haven't really changed too much outside of it. Like, I think people don't change as much as you'd think at college, and it seems like you were very intentional when you heard those things and finding those things out. Like, do anything else come to mind where you heard something or experienced something that you're like, holy shit, this is I didn't know this was a possibility?
I love what you're getting at, right? And it reminds me a little bit, one of the things that Steve Jobs said is the world was built by people no smarter than you.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to be in a place like Harvard where you have people who, truly, it's a very jarring experience, I think, for most people, of like, wherever you are, you're probably one of the smartest people in your class and capable, and you get there and you are not. And maybe you're good at one particular thing, maybe you're good at a lot, but you start seeing the different edges of intelligence, and you start to, it can break down your worldview of actually, like, the answer to life as a kid is just be really good at class, and you're going to, like, be on that ladder. You'll get to you get to high school, the good classes, you get the good grades, you go to the good college, all that kind of stuff. And it was two things. One was realization of, if it's just pure raw horsepower, I'm fine, but not all the way, at the top in that kind of a context. But two, you'd also see people who just got stuck on these tracks of, like, they were so good at what they're doing. They sort of saw it. Okay, I'm going to go from, the nice college to the default job, then to get the promotion. And if you're not careful, you're suddenly living life that someone else designed for you.
Right.
And what I would say about, I think the experience of seeing with Kareem, which was really interesting, and then later probably led to even, some of our founder journeys. This was someone who, by the way, I think Kareem might fit in that bucket of, like, up there smartest at college, but he couldn't fall into the traps of everyone else because he had the wrong visa status, the wrong passport.
Wasn't allowed to.
You had to be a lot more creative. You go to China a lot, and suddenly there isn't a default path, and sometimes you find yourself in rooms you never expected and can learn things. But I think in different ways, we found ourselves kind of like falling off of standard tracks and seeing and having good life experiences even outside of it. And so I think that probably also stuck with us quite a bit. I think, I think what Steve was getting at is right, but in a weird way, I think there were elements of where we each spent time that luckily led us to, like, try taking some jumps early on.
Right.
I do think one other thing that stuck with me was from my first, I did an internship in, I think, like, banking and restructuring, sort of the bankruptcy side of things. And I remember meeting someone who, he was an associate at the firm, which was, as like a summer intern was like the dream, like paid
God,
at the time, totally, made a lot of cash, and was a good looking guy, had nice apartment right on the beach, good looking girlfriend, all this stuff where, like, if you're in college, you're like, wow, this guy's got it all. And I remember, like, one, I was, for any law enforcement watching, I was 21 at the time, I promise. He had like a few too many beers or whatever at a bar, and I get into a conversation I didn't expect to have with him, and he talked about I think a lot of people know about this, but it's because of, like, golden handcuffs, where like his job paid him very well. Too much. And he didn't love it. But he couldn't bear the thought of leaving it. Because where would you go? And actually all the affordances of life and what he had basically said and implied is like, unless you love it, like don't start. Like be really careful, because it happens way faster than you think. You can get stuck on this path living this life that you didn't expect to. And so I was like, okay, you should get some sleep and whatever. But like, I remember the conversation for years. And I even think in some of the year before starting Paribus, that was, I had gone into banking. That was in the back of my mind for quite a bit. And yeah.
That's a fascinating. Yeah, I think there are a lot less two-way doors than we think. Like, I'll do this thing and then maybe stop later on. And, it's very easy. But once your identity gets wrapped up in it, your social status, all these types of things, it's a lot harder to reverse.
For sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You talked a little bit about Paribus. I think the founding story is amazing. So, you go on this trip. Talk to me about the trip and, how you got the insight of like, hey, wait a second, there's something here potentially.
So just like that banker, I took a job in banking. And for an entire year and a half, I think there was 3 to 4 days that I left the office and the sun was still out. Okay, that's like that. There are a lot of people who live that way, and when you're in it, you don't really think about it. But
during that time, were you like, this something needs to change, or
it's? I don't know that I've ever like the world's greatest employee. Like I was good at what I was doing, but like there were times when I'm like, why are we doing this? No one's going to read this stuff, but you know what, you have a job and you do it, and anyway. So it occurred to me, but there were a group of friends who were living some version of that story, and we'd gotten together for dinner on a Sunday, and we said, we should really just take like a trip. None of us had gone anywhere, and so we were like. It was like 2013. We like spent time online researching. Oh, let's go to Puerto Rico. Great. We should do research on 500 tabs, incognito mode. We got a great flight, great hotel, booked it. We were really happy. Yep. The next day, another friend wasn't there, wanted to join, and went to go send her the flight and link to go book. And as I was looking at it, wait a minute, the same flight that we were so smart in booking. It's $100 less. Is this right? Did I pull up the wrong one? Turned out it was right. And after closing the window, opening it, and then I was really frustrated because
you got ripped off, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I felt very ripped off. And so part of my job then in banking was like you would read these credit documents, indentures, these like long legal documents to see what do the rules say.
Right.
So I did that. I looked up what did the rules say for the flight.
Can you even do this?
Can you do this? And it turned out that every airline in the U.S. By law was required to give you a refund for 24 hours and would also give you a price adjustment. So if you went and said, hey, I bought this flight and it went down, to give you the difference. Slow day at work. So I called them up, spent another half an hour on the phone before you knew it, had it back for everybody. And I just sat there and was like, I sort of do this for a living and I didn't know about this. And I wish I knew. And I'd taken some computer science. Kareem was TFing the course in college. And, there are some things computers are really good at, which is like, pulling and structuring information out of a document, or going and checking a website and pulling a field every single day and scraping it. And what if it could tell me that this price just changed? Could it reach? And so I sort of just started pulling at the thread, and I wrote an email to Kareem, later that day of what if there was a service that would go get you refunds on flights. And we thought it was really interesting. Pulled at the thread a lot. Flights are interesting, but they tend to go up in price the closer they get to it. Thought back to my time at Express, where
what about retail?
Retail seems to go down. There seems to be a new sale all the time. And so that was the kernel of the idea.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I love how were there any other insights during that time or potential companies you thought about starting before Paribus where you saw like a problem or a potential arbitrage opportunity where you're like, hey, this something doesn't check out here? Or obviously nothing to this extent, but
I think that there's so many people of this desire just to create something and start new businesses. Like, why is Shark Tank so big? Like, why are these different shows? Like, I think entrepreneurship has never been a more popular idea in some sense, but the way that I started, and I think a lot of people start out with is, you do like, what would a banker do? And you and you're like, okay, finance is big. What's a good idea in finance? Or retail is big.
Get the first Google answer or ChatGPT.
And you go from like the world to a particular idea, and it's just almost always the wrong way to do it.
Right.
So I had lots of versions of that. And instead you're like, okay, I can't come up with a good idea. And so what we concluded, and there was a good, I think Paul Graham had a good essay on this, of like a lot of good startup ideas come from noticing things. And so I think I was in a mindset where most days at a banking job like that, the flight price goes down, frustrated, call it, move on. Great. I got $100, go to the next thing. And that's it. But I was in this mindset of actually of wait a minute, was this common? Could this happen to other things? Could there be a product? Does this even work as a business? How would it work? And just like followed this little sign and intuition, which later revealed there actually was a business pursue. And, we started testing and building like a fun prototype in the weekend. We didn't, we'd never coded a web app, but we built
in Excel, right?
We built in VBA. Yeah, exactly. You know all the stuff. It's anyway, I think that was really important for us.
I think that's amazing. Yeah, I love that essay. It's, don't look for startup ideas because you're going to come up on these tar pit ideas. Just be very curious and be, very acutely aware of what am I experiencing? What problems am I facing? Right? Like, that's frustrating for you. Maybe it's frustrating for someone else.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. This is where things I think get really crazy. Actually, let's touch on this a little bit more. So, you have this prototype. You've iterated very quickly after that, and I think that's been a thesis at both Paribus and Ramp. How quickly you iterate. What's the importance of once you guys figured out like, okay, there's potentially something here. Like, let's iterate very quickly. Let's try and get customers. You applied to YC as well in 2015. That the first time. Talk to me a little bit about that sort of process.
We applied twice. The first time we were rejected.
That's gotta suck, right? Or
because we had this whole dream of like, okay, we have 10 users. We think this is gonna work. We applied. We've gotten into good schools before,
right?
And so they're gonna take us, right? And then once we get it, we're gonna leave our jobs and go for it. And then we were rejected. And
part of the plan.
It's totally normal. And like, actually, like, if you think one rejection's bad, try 10 years of this stuff. But, the first phase, by the way, at the time, people were very into like the lean startup idea, just iterate. I sort of subscribe a little bit more to like the, teal 0 to 1 view of like, you should have kind of a certain view of the world, in which you base it, then you go pursue it and you'll iterate on the details, but like you kind of know where things are going. And so we almost spent, some of this was like Kareem's, was on a visa and we had to solve that. Coupled with like, I didn't have a lot of savings. And so we were kind of building it up. And so we were trying to figure out, and validate, okay, this worked for me. I saved money on this flight, but how big is this? How many are the prices of things going up or down? Can we actually get a refund? Maybe you could know it, but
they won't let you. Or
exactly. Like Amazon might respond to my ticket, but would they respond to a business doing this for lots of people? Could we get the data at scale? There was these businesses where you could forward receipts, but I thought it would be very strange for people to forward everything. Like, could you actually build the UI? And so we got to a spot where it turned out you could collect it. We found this weird, no one had done it quite like this, where you could collect people's email, and instead of building productivity apps, you could just collect receipts. So it was like this novel way of doing it. If you
how'd you figure that out? Like what discovery? Just a deep amount of research, or just testing and playing around? Or
it was, I was trying to solve my own problem of like, all right, I'm going to buy things, but how would I, get the information on a receipt cleanly enough? And so my first intuition, let's go to a credit card statement. But if you look at your credit card, it'll say like you spent money at Best Buy, but it doesn't say what you bought or where. Emails and then browser extensions were starting to pop up. You could build a tool that would always live on your browser and then could go figure it out when you just bought something. That was idea number one. But iPhone was taking off. We thought would the future just be mobile, so we felt like too weird. But everything you buy online, you get an e-receipt on it. And so we were curious of, are there some standard APIs we could go plug into? And it turned out there were a few early proto businesses starting to think about it. Gmail had a standard kind of library. And we had to kind of learn how to go and plug in and build a web app to do it. But we realized actually we could just, you could pull it out. You could go and do this. And I think when we applied to YC the first time, we had gotten to this place where you could install it, an app on someone's Gmail. And pretty predictably within 30 days, like one in, I don't know, at the time, with the stores we had, one in 10 people would go and save money. So that was pretty cool. And we thought, isn't this enough? It might have been, but we hadn't yet proven out of how could you convince people to install this potentially creepy feeling app into your email.
Scanning everything?
That scanning, it's like, is it going to read all my stuff?
Right.
Is it secure? You're saying you're going to write emails as me. It's Eric, my friend. Are you going to read my email?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't quite clear. And so the rejection was helpful because we, in some ways it can either like totally demotivate you, or it can like kind of iron your resolve a little bit.
Right.
And we said like this, maybe they don't see it, but we see it. Like we have to try it. And so we kind of mustered up the courage to say like, we're going to prove we're going to make this work, whether or not others are there. And so we then ended up quitting our jobs, grew some mustaches.
Without funding.
We worked for a couple of years. And so that was it, without funding. And we had a clock too.
Yeah.
It's not legal to work for very long without a visa. And so there was a time period that we had to make it work. And that was part of it. It was okay, we're going to give ourselves this period of time to prove it out. We'll either get into YC, build this thing out, or we're going to go back. And so I actually think it was very helpful because it was this huge forcing function to start moving faster.
Yeah.
We then, by the time we reapplied, this is probably more particular to people who've worked at like professional firms. A lot of like bankers, consultants, they kind of train you to never tell anybody what you're doing, client secrecy, all this kind of stuff. So we had all these bad habits. So we were very worried for a bit of, we had this great idea. No one had built it yet. What if we tell people? Right. Which makes it very hard to acquire customers.
Yeah.
I think basically one of our friends, Jeff Wu, who had gone through YC, I think in 2012, basically shook us and he was like, guys, like you're saying like, I can put my email in there within 30 days. Now 20% of people, like $10 is going to come out the other end. We're like, yeah, he's like, just get it in people's hands. Tell people about it. Like go and launch it. And so started learning. And anyway, long story short, by the time we reapplied 6 months later, I think we had like 500 users. It was growing like 10% per week.
Right.
People were saving, people were telling people about it, and it wasn't industrial grade, but it was enough to get going.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. I think at YC, they focus a lot about like growth rate as well, right? Like, are you actually solving problems? Do people care about this? Or
so the thing that I think both makes people more and less, and probably should make people more excited, is actually like a lot of the core of the YC programming is very simple. You meet sometimes one-on-one with a partner, other times in a group, but every time you do it, you have 15 minutes and you have to answer the same 3 questions. 1, how quickly did you grow this week? Maybe you had a goal of 10% user growth, revenue growth, whatever it was per week. 2nd, what is the biggest problem that you have? You need to be able to articulate it. And then 3rd, what are you doing to solve that problem?
Right.
That's it.
Nothing else matters.
That is like basically the whole YC program. And of course, there's speakers, there's community, all that kind of stuff. But it's like you have an extreme forcing function because in some sense, all they're saying is the only thing that matters is this.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think it's brilliant because like the problem you find out when you first start a business is you could spend your time on anything.
Yeah.
Right. You know that there could be a giant business, but you're not sure how you could get there. You could go raise funds. You could go sell people hand to hand. You could go work on some marketing. You could try to get press. You could go try to hire your next person who like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And in some sense, setting the constraint of like, what should you focus on?
Right.
Just obsess over it allows you to make trade-offs and start to create velocity, such that hopefully by the end of the summer, you have this beautiful chart that goes up and to the right. So of course, other people start to believe it's inevitable. Like there's a lot of brilliance in what they're trying to do. And I think it's just generally applicable to companies in the early stages where you're trying to create something, create a sense of inevitability and create focus for the team.
This is going to happen.
Yeah.
And you can't focus on anything but the A+ problem in that scenario.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was there any moments during those weeks? I know one thing that you've talked about is like the inputs don't always equal the outputs, right? And you might spend the entire bandwidth of a week on growth, and Kareem posts on Reddit and gets 400 users, right?
Yes, yeah.
What sort of experiences during that YC process, or even afterwards in the early days of Paribus, where you like realize that inputs don't equal outputs, or potentially you guys are spending time on the wrong problems? Like, anything stick out to you during that time in retrospect? Or
we were very lucky with Paribus, and this became much more obvious with Ramp, where if you're, I'll give you an example of inputs and outputs being very far, and if you focus on the output, it's going to be confusing.
Right.
If we had our first Super Bowl ad, let's talk about the Super Bowl. Let's say that we went and you're a star player. You show up to the first day of practice and the coach says, all right, we're going to practice today to win the Super Bowl. Everybody get in formation, go. Right? Yeah. Like what do I do with that? Like it doesn't,
I'm new here. What?
It's obviously ridiculous, right? And so what do? Like, it's like, well, you focus on the basics and you decompose it to, we're going to lift weights. We're going to practice to run sprints. We're going to nail these plays, whatever it is. We're going to get really, really good at the basics. And if we do this, we think the score will take care of itself, which is usually right? And I believe in that. I think if you nail the inputs, that will ultimately give you the shot and the focus to get to the outputs.
Right.
When when inputs and outputs of actions are sufficiently close, sometimes you can use the output as an approximation, but generally, as you're building industrial scale businesses, they separate out, and so that's where that comes from.
Right.
For Paribus, in some sense, we didn't know how to build apps with great user experiences, so we designed an app with no user experience. You would just like sign up, link your email, and like that was it.
Good luck.
And that actually was this amazing weird constraint that helped us in some sense. We were able to distill almost into this like very simple loop for growth, where there was kind of three core moments that we tried to optimize around. One, which was the homepage. This was this app you'd never seen or heard of in your busy life, and there was nothing else quite like it. You link your Gmail and this AI agent would like go save you money. How could you explain that really quickly? And so just like really distilling of how do you articulate a compelling idea in as few of words as possible and create desire. Next, at the moment of you're linking your Gmail, how do you instill trust? Right. So that was like the next screen. Try to eliminate all the other unnecessary steps. Then once
how do we show trust? That's the only thing that matters at this stage.
That's it. And that's what you're in. Then there's the onboarding flow, which we can talk about, which is very helpful in driving referrals. And then you're done. And maybe one day in a week you wake up and like, oh my God, like you just save $100 on this TV that you bought or these clothes or whatever. It's great. There was, and we would make money by charging a cut.
Yeah.
And the whole question for us at YC was we had to get growth because that's how we'd make more money. We didn't have a lot of funds to go do ads or anything. Our only hope was we needed to grow
Organic.
Through users, basically. And so then we started decomposing and, getting obsessed with this idea of like, viral load, K-factor driven growth. And you go and figure out there was this loop of, okay, how could you maximize the conversion of a homepage? Once they're there, how could we convince people the moment everyone would see this first downloading screen, should we actually try to get people to refer their friends?
Right.
And then once you save, it could be, hey, here's $100, thanks so much. Or how do you make that very joyous? How do you make this so great that people want to tell everybody at that moment they've never been happy with their product?
Yeah.
And then if you could, what do the friends see? How do you get them back to the homepage and repeat that loop? And so we try to decompose every single one of these things because we knew the output and we were able to create an equation, understand all the steps. And then we were just trying to optimize every single step. And each one of these had a coefficient where if you could do it, it would create what we were trying to get to at the end of more users, faster compounding growth. And so that was useful. I think probably that summer was primarily spent on two things: how to get press and coverage, and then how to have every user lead to more users on average.
One more. Yeah. In that process, I know we're getting a little bit tactical here.
Oh, sure.
But during that funnel, how, like, you don't have any users to start off with, right? Like, how do you go about testing that? Because I can imagine, maybe a dumb question, but if you've got like 10 users, right, like maybe the data is not super interesting yet, or like, how do you go about in the early days of testing? Like, okay, what really does move the needle?
Yes. So in the very early days, it's by hand, right? Is the first step, is bring it in. But we had gotten to a spot where consistently we could get like, it wouldn't meet our 10% goal, but we could get like 100 users or 200 users. And then occasionally we had started to figure out how to get people to maybe write about it on Reddit or to have local news kind of cover it. And so maybe one way to think about it is we could create some big external event, which would create like a shockwave of like 200 users or 500 users that would come through. And, you could start to look at, okay, 200 users, how many users do they create?
Right.
In the early days, maybe it's 20. And then the whole question is, could we get it to 40 or 60 or 80? And so we basically would like send a shockwave through, see how many users we had kind of created from it, and then just run tests with every subsequent shockwave. Yeah. And I'll give you an example of like, at the beginning, we were trying to Well, first, when you listened, so we knew that we wanted customers to refer other customers.
Right.
And so we weren't sure what a good referral program could be. And so we did probably the dumbest thing, which is we created 2 referral programs. And it turns out if you give people 2 choices, they most often don't pick either. Yeah. So don't do that.
Yeah.
And then, we did, we're like, should we give people money? Should we give people $5, right, to go? It turns out it's okay, but often the people who $5 gets them to tell their friends to sign up maybe are like, I don't want to say like sleazy, but like they're more motivated by money. They're not necessarily
care about
they're trying to monetize their friends, right? Which is a little not great. You're not going to get the highest quality users. You'll invite kind of gambling.
Yeah.
When we listen to customers, the biggest problems they would have if you like actually overheard somebody at dinner, or you were like pretended to be someone doing market research, on this weird app Paribus, and you'd say, okay, well, you explain it, you save money on it. How do you pitch your friends? And they'd say something like, oh, there's this new app. It's called Paribus. You sign up and it saves you money on things you bought online. All you do is link your Gmail, and that's all you need to do, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
The way it makes money is it keeps a cut of what it saves you. So it charges you 25%. You should know that. But other than that, it's like
you're not losing money.
Exactly. You should try it. But like, the way that friends would talk about it to other friends is like, hey, this is good, but you're my friend. Here's the problem with it. But you should feel comfortable enough with this problem to sign up anyway for it. And as we were thinking about it, we're like, we should attack that. We should give them like, there's this problem, but by the way, I can help you solve this problem. Yeah. And so we came with this referral program of, for every, if you sign up with my referral link, we had 2 variants of it. One, you'll be able to keep 5% more. So, they'll only take 20%.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Or like, or you instead of keeping 75, you'll keep 80%.
Right.
Or like the same thing mathematically, but inverted, right? They'll cut your fee by 5%. So you should use my link and whatever, right? You want to make your friend happy.
Yeah. Like, I got you.
Things took off, right?
Really? That simple tweak.
You could, at one point, I think that 50% of users would hit share upon onboarding. So it had an enormous effect on it. But the crazy part is, even in testing little things, like I think avoiding that 5% fee was 10 times more powerful than increasing your savings by 5%.
Really?
Even though it's the same math.
Yeah.
So I guess that's all to say, like, I know we really went super deep into it. Like I think actually decomposing, like understanding the output you're trying to drive, but really decomposing inputs at every step allows you to start asking much more interesting questions and, having simple, compelling things at every turn, which grows your business faster.
Yeah, I love that. Like just actually looking at the customer journey and saying, at this very stage, how are you describing it to people? Oh, it's this is a problem. Okay, we can use that in our messaging and how we talk about this.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You guys wanted to get on, you were pretty smart about the viral marketing as well. Like you wanted to get on Today's Show and get on all these shows, right? End up working out, like you got on one of these shows and I think your servers even melted, or like, what was that like, right? So I think a lot of, I imagine the experience is, you're starting to get this thing rolling, you're getting a lot of users. It's just, you and a couple of people, like you have to start hiring. Like what was that rapid growth like? And specifically also getting on the show.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's talk about getting on those shows.
Yeah.
So
you can just do things.
You can just do things. First, comment on marketing and comms. You spend months or years working on your new your new company. You design this great brand, beautiful messaging, and you want to put it out there and have people come. And you say, I've got the message and I need to get it out into the world. Yeah. And you go reach out to journalists and say, no, thanks. They probably don't respond. And it makes sense, right? Like these journalists. They don't exist to go talk about your marketing.
Right.
They want to do the news. And so maybe my first comment of like, if you want to do news, you got to remember like, you should actually try to understand who are these people, what are the news that these people cover, what are the beats, what are they interested in, what are the type of stories they write, and perhaps you could pitch them a story that fits.
That's interesting for them.
That is interesting for them versus like, what does your company do? So for example, if I went, hey, there's this like, start like, there's this startup Paribus, you should cover it. Like, it's not going to work.
Okay, great.
But it turned out there were some people that, if you really thought about it carefully, would want to talk about a company like Paribus, which allowed customers with very little effort to
Make
get
money.
savings owed to them.
Yeah.
Today's show, Good Morning America, they're very busy, but there are a lot of local news stations. And at every one of these local news stations, CBS Las Vegas, NBC, Topeka, Fox Tampa, there's probably a consumer reporter. And you'll see segments like Consumer Watch or, Channel 5 on your 5 or Stretch Your Dollar. And they're doing segments to help consumers, people watching TV, do a little bit better financially.
Yeah.
People don't pitch them. And so what we did is we came up with, we knew how much we could save if everyone in America was signed up for Paribus. We thought people could save $15 to $30 billion at the time. And so, we did a couple things. We looked at if it was 15 billion across the country, maybe it'd be 300 million in savings basis, for the population in this region.
Yep.
We knew there was 50 people who just saved in Las Vegas in the last couple weeks.
Great case study.
Great case studies. And we could reach out to someone there and say, hey, Trisha, this is Eric. Las Vegas locals are leaving $300 million of refunds unclaimed every single year.
Yeah.
There's a new startup that's getting it for them. We had 50 people just in Las Vegas over the last week. We'd love to talk to you. I think it'd be a great fit for this segment or show how we can get money back for customers for people living in Las Vegas.
People watching your show.
A lot of people ignored it. A lot of people followed up.
Yeah.
You start showing up in local news a little bit easier, and then you've maybe on your 40th time saying, and now these 80, these 10 different local station covers you can go on to today, and so you can start to move up all the way
that
through.
Momentum.
And actually go and do this. So that was a big part of that kind of run. It's true. And there's very few things like the Today Show, Good Morning America, where like 5 to 10 million people are actually just watching it simultaneously. Yeah. And, it really can melt your servers. So it's very exciting. You hear from people who you knew from your life and they're finding like, oh, that's what your startup does. And so it's like very validating. I get it
now.
But, I think it's much more of a solved problem now.
Yeah.
I think like Vercel, Webflow, like there's different services where front ends can scale dynamically with you. But at the time, you had to deal with what if you only normally have like 50 page sessions or if you use it at 100.
1000x.
Suddenly it's 1000x. Yeah. So we learn more about that. The downside.
A good problem.
Good
to
problems.
Have.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're getting all these users. There's a huge influx.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit earlier about like validating the problem. Like, hey, would companies even allow us to act on behalf of our customers to sort of get these refunds?
Yeah.
And it turned out that you guys ran into a little bit of a problem with some cease and desist letters and people being a little bit angry that you're actually, doing the policy that they set up. I can imagine you've had all this growth, you're feeling great. And then that's probably like a, oh shit moment. Like, what was that like when you started, I think Amazon cut you off and you dropped revenue potentially 80%, overnight. Like that's got to be a poop your pants moment, right?
So, the startup founder, we're still focusing on one metrics, 10+% growth every single week. So you start getting very obsessed with like dashboards. And I remember there was different moments of it. I mean, so maybe, but first we have like suddenly we're seeing, the 80% start to happen. Even before that, there were some stores that didn't like the idea.
Right.
And, I think Amazon is sort of an interesting one where I think probably by 2016, they were changing a few hundred million prices per day. It was very dynamic.
Insane.
And we were still growing by 40% per month. And so it meant actually from the perspective of, a store's customer service, you might be going from getting not hearing about this very often to tens to hundreds to thousands of emails every single day, starting to come in just about this one thing. And it created real things. And so you're right. The first thing that happened was we got a cease and desist from different folks saying like, hey, you need to go and stop doing this. And the interesting setup of the model, it's now very relevant for AI agent companies starting to think about this, is we actually realized by, stores as terms of service and actually as US laws, it's actually normal to have an agent. You can have a lawyer represent you. You can have, a sibling go if, return an old shirt that you bought.
Right.
You got a refund on it. Yeah. we were acting as an agent. What was different? It was a digital agent.
Yeah. That was new.
Yeah, that was different. But it was actually going and sending from your email. And so long story short, we would try to get threatened. People would say, how are you storing this? AWS, very secure, great architecture, which was interesting for some people. But, there wasn't a great legal case to go and do this.
Right.
But, some people concluded maybe you better get rid of it. So functionally that happened. And so prior to being public, we could see this dashboard of every single refund that was coming in, and it started to slow by like 2%, 5%, 10%. And we were seeing this and wondering what was going on. You started seeing different agents saying, oh, we don't have this policy. And we're like, what's going on? You'd see stuff getting disappeared.
Yeah.
And so it was scary, right? Like it was like the revenue and base of your company, what you're doing is suddenly just getting clamped down really quickly. And what does it mean? So that's
scary. Were there any things that in retrospect you thought about or focused on that allowed you to get out of that, not too scarred? Or, like imagine someone's listening to this and they're in that scenario, right? Like their revenue just got cut. A competitor just did something. Like what would you advise them? What sort of state of mind would you go into, or what would you really focus on? What did you do during that time, right? Don't panic, maybe.
Got to get through it.
Yeah.
And I think, by the way, too, at this time, like we had, a dozen people working at Paribus.
That's scary.
The people that depended on me and you're exactly right. You feel the sense of like panic and dread and everything of like, I'm nervous, but how will I face my team?
Right.
Like, should I be nervous about this and inspire focus? Should I be confident, inspire action? Even the psychology of working through that was, I was tough, but I kind of, it's a funny saying, but I think it's sort of true. If you're going to panic early, like, just like, do something about it. Like don't
just ignore it, like actually be honest and say.
You have to, and it's not going to get solved. Like, I sort of think that, if you're, it's like Churchill, like if you're going through hell, keep going. Yeah. I think that's kind of it. Like you have to go and figure out, I think ultimately a lot of building a business is being a business of like problem solving.
Yeah.
You're going to have all sorts of issues. You're going to deal with things, be put in scenarios that you didn't anticipate, and you have to figure it out. And there are paths.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Did you, I want to touch on one thing and then we can move on a little bit, but during that time, you're talking to the team, like is the message with them, I know you're very transparent at Ramp as well. Is it very much like, hey guys, this is the situation. We all know the situation. Let's all put our heads together and really figure this out.
100%.
Yeah.
That was it.
I love that.
And it was fun. I mean, look, it was a wild spring and summer.
I bet.
In some sense, when you're growing 40+% per month, like, it seems bad, but it means that you're doubling less than every 2 months. And, you're actually not that far from being right back to where you were, but you really needed to think about like, what is your strategy? How do you solve it? And just how do you execute through? And so, it was a good time.
I love it. Yeah. Awesome. So you kind of get over this hump or a big hump, if you will. And you start getting, you've got 700,000 users and you start talking to Capital One. They approach you about the acquisition, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I don't know how much you want to talk about that. Like, why did you want to, like, was that partnership a good fit? How did you as a founder know it was ready to move on and actually, graduate the business in that sense? What were the negotiations like? Like, what can you share about that sort of experience? Because it was very quick. It happened very quick.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we launched in May of 2015 and the company sold October 2016.
Incredible.
It was quick. So I think, there's a saying that goes of, companies are bought, not sold. And I think that's just true. I think that it's totally right. And we had started with Capital One originally with the intent of a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
We'd met them probably a year prior to selling.
Right.
And there was something that was very alluring about us working with them, as a company that was just obsessing over how do we grow 10% per week, the idea of a company with tens and tens of millions of customers saying you should use this product, one, A, that's good, but B, they actually had really interesting data that could do this. As the credit card company, they knew what people were buying and where. And
they didn't need the emails to tell them.
They knew where people were buying, but not necessarily what.
Good point.
Which actually led to an interesting,
right? Because I didn't have the tech that you guys had to.
And if you sort of think about, this isn't true for most banks. One of the core problems that banks have and why the most people don't love their bank is, usually you never hear from banks, but if you do, perhaps because maybe there's fraud,
Yep.
or maybe you owe money.
Yeah.
Neither are very positive experiences.
Right.
And so we sort of pitched this idea of what if every time you swiped your Capital One card, you could know the card would have your back and could help you automatically ensure that you get the best and lowest priced. And even if the price drops the next week, you will get the difference. That would be pretty cool, right? And everyone saw the appeal. It would be really exciting to go do this. And so it started initially of like, is there some really interesting partnership and kind of new class of benefit,
this new experience for their customers.
Exactly. And for us, lots of new users, and they could, hit our bullseye of like, what if someone just bought something at a store that just had this huge store-wide sale? They'd get to the magic moment not on the 30th day, but on like the first day, which would lead to faster viral growth, all these things we were talking about. So that's what came about. As this was progressing out of partnership, we had talked about, we'd love to have you invest and have skin in the game. And by the way, we're raising this new round, and I think it accelerated things. They went from wanting to partner, and I believe and suspect there were people internally trying to create it at different points, then to like, wait a minute, like actually, they said, we really want to buy it. And it sort of raised the stakes of, okay, now the price makes the difference to a bunch of 20-year-olds versus like, some multi-billion-dollar venture fund, the returns they produce are very, very different. And they said, we'd like to buy you. And we're like, oh, thanks. We don't want to do that. And I don't think most big companies are used to that, and came back, and
we really want to buy.
We really want to. And I was 26 then. And Kareem, same, like, we talked about the Visa kind of stuff, like, it sounds fun until you realize like it's real stakes. And so it was a very complicated summer, but I think part of what led us to do it and get excited about it was, one, it was first, like a lot of the motivation for it is, I think a lot of great entrepreneurs are motivated by like expression and bringing something to the world. And there was this chance to do this at a way bigger scale with enormous amount of resources and some actual structural advantages to build something special that we couldn't. So that was like compelling. Second, it was like, we talked about the revenue dropping 80% overnight. Like that was half a year before.
Very recent.
But it's a reminder of like the stakes are real and things can change really quickly. And so are you sure? Coupled with we were 26 and it was like a life-changing thing and could learn a lot. And so I think after kind of getting over our own egos for a minute and just like thinking through it, we realized like this, it actually could be really amazing to go and do it. And so those were the types of things we were thinking about. There's also turned out could change the lives, not just us, but like a lot of early team members. And we didn't totally appreciate it then, but turned out to be the most amazing blessing. Like we learned a new business, how credit cards work, but also like the next time we went, instead of it being of like, we only had 6 months, otherwise we're screwed. Like you could actually be very intentional and do things on your own terms.
Longer term thinking. Much more. I think Palmer Luckey talks about why they ended up selling to Meta is because the pitch was more like, hey, we can invest in you, really. We can expand the mission. And I think it's probably much the same for you at Capital One. It's like, hey, they've got all these resources.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's a founder-led company. Still, like it's I think that they really are focused and thoughtful of trying to do things in a new, different, and better way. And so I felt like I could learn from someone who, with himself and a great team, built something great, and that proved out to be true.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, let's talk about that. We're going to skip over a little bit, unless there's anything at Capital One specifically that you want to talk about. But I think it's very interesting. Two things. One, the story of how you end up getting the itch again to start Ramp. And also just the amount of research you guys did. Like I think it's fascinating. Let's talk a little about at Capital One. Like, there's anything during that time, like apart from just learning more about the industry, were there any experiences or things that carry through to this day? Like maybe anything tactical or meeting wise, or just in general observations that you got outside of industry specific things, or?
For sure. I mean, one. I think when you think about like building a business, Paribus was like a nice reminder of actually there's like very few people in the world that will steal your idea. And even then, like you probably had to execute them if you're like focused. But like you learn pretty quickly that the biggest battle of a startup is people not caring, right? Not giving a shit about what you're doing. And for good reason. Like people have their own lives, they're busy, their own stresses, their own dreams, motivations that aren't your random SaaS app that you have 2 seconds to convince them to use. Yeah. And I think in some sense, Capital One was maybe a financial services version of some of the lessons, I remember pulling from just like Steve Jobs biographies and Apple's of like, how do you communicate something really simply at a large scale? And at Capital One, they were very obsessive over like a clean and consistent brand. And I think I learned a lot about what does it take to build something that scales, that goes from like, they stand, and they go toe to toe with companies that have been around for 150 plus years. And you wouldn't realize like this was started by people who are like still running the company.
They're still alive.
and I think that this question of how do you build brands that have immense trust, I think was one of the central questions that Paribus had being connected to people's email, and certainly had at Capital One, and later Ramp would have. So I learned quite a bit about that. I didn't know the first, people think of Paribus as a fintech, but it never was. It was like this weird email savings app. I guess now AI agent is probably the most appropriate way to call it, but it was like 10 years before people like created that term, a thing that took action on your behalf. But like, I learned how credit card companies like really worked, and that was very powerful. And there were certain like products that we couldn't build that later got us onto like the way we built Ramp of like it, that dream, that pitch of like we could go and just like send a push notification or an email to someone who just bought something at Nordstrom. Took a year to build because the processing, like there were aspects of it that weren't in house. There was the way the technical teams architected where data stored, which meant it was like this very hard collaboration. And so it influenced a lot of like if we built this like things
like
we need to build
from the
differently
ground up to be quick.
Exactly,
which I think is a big philosophy at Ramp.
That was a big thing, right? And it also makes you think about like at Paribus, every day count. You were going to run out of money if you weren't like obsessive over getting things done and getting things done quickly. And I encountered a place with 55,000 people, and the pace was like completely different. And there's the like naive view of like all these big companies, like how can they possibly compete? And then somehow they keep getting bigger every year, and you're wondering, and then you start asking the more interesting question of like, how is that possible? And it turns out they may not be good at everything. And in fact, it actually might be smart to move slow under certain strategies, which we don't need to get into that too much. But you gain an appreciation for like, even if companies can be bad at it, if they're a big company, there is something they are unbelievably good at. And then you start to think of, okay, later, if you're going to go start a business, like what is that thing that you're going to be good at and what's different? And I think Capital One, they had a number of insights, but one of the big ones was you could use data in order to compete differently. For them, it was you could do, you could underwrite populations, groups of people who couldn't get credit cards if you sort of think about rates and approach. And they were really good at risk-based, using information to do that. You get to know others. Amex, unbelievable brand. One of the best brands, I think, of the maybe of all time. Like they're, the amount of trust and the sense of arriving if you have that card is great. Chase, all these kind of things. But I think one of the kind of harrowing experiences I had when I was there is without going too deep into it. We launched this product within a matter of days, and I got yelled at by my boss because
the refund policy feature, right? Or
exactly, the late shipment feature.
That's one.
And the reason was like, as a for banks, you want to be very careful of like. It's good to get things out there, but if you inadvertently change an interest rate, like has enormous consequences, all this kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of processes that are designed to move really slowly. And so it was just like jarring as like someone who had spent years just trying to be like a speedboat, get wherever they could as fast as possible, to like have to be on a cruise ship and couldn't turn and that kind of stuff. And so I think that the hole that we felt was that, the world is becoming just radically more interesting. Technology is progressing really quickly, and all the Valley companies we knew got there by iterating very quickly and building products. But this was so missing from financial services. Right. And so it led off to questioning and asking, like, how could you build truly a first-rate, world-class, dependable, financial service product, but be really fast? Actually designed specifically for that.
Is that why you guys also, we're going to jump ahead now to ramp, I guess?
Yeah, sure. We've arrived. Yeah,
we've arrived.
Yeah.
Is that also why you guys started with credit cards, or, like, what's the quickest way we can launch and really start being effective for customers in the quickest way possible? Is that why, or were there anything else you thought about, starting off with first?
Well, so some of it, so great question. There was a period of time that we were like thinking about if we were to go do something next, what it could be. And even once we got very interested in credit cards, there was different versions of it, right? Like I didn't think that partnership credit cards, co-branded credit cards were done particularly well. But we worked with a lot of retailers, knew they had great distribution, and perhaps you could have a card that they could go and issue out. So we thought a lot about that. We thought, there were aspects of consumer card that were interesting, but knew the regulation would require a slowness of movement. Right. In corporate was very interesting to us, but I think we were stuck by, and I've talked about this in some places in the past, I won't belabor it, but like we noticed that it, being the savings people in a credit card business, we sort of stumbled into just like at moments weird misalignments with customers of like, everyone was obsessing over how to get people to spend more money because it generated more, all that kind of stuff. And as savings people, we'd ask people, do you want points or cash backs? Different. And if you really listen, people would say, more in my bank account. And try to do that. The math, that's pretty good. Just don't spend $100 on something you don't need. It's 100 times better than getting like $1 back. And so
I love that saying.
We got onto this idea of there's this like great profitable product that like just isn't doing what its customer actually wants. But if you could, you might be able to become a player in this space. And so that got us onto it. We started studying the market very deeply, and a lot of conditions had changed such that if you look at the early story of like in some sense, maybe Capital One is like, prior to this, past 10 years was like the last great credit card company. Right. And to do it, they needed to start it inside of another bank, build a whole org with like hundreds, thousands of people working on it, and then spin it out. And then going, so it's like the amount of time, the coordination was so intensive, and things had changed such that it was possible to, if you knew what you were doing, you could actually start a certain kind of card from your living room and have customers, if you were really focused, within 2 months. No one had done it that fast, but we started validating, realizing it was possible. A lot of the problem of payments businesses were in the US, people accept want to buy things on credit is it can get exponentially expensive, and there's risk problems. It's great if you spend $100 and maybe I make like 50 cents or $1 or something like that. That's really good. But if you're paying me back every 30 days and we're growing really quickly, suddenly like
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And so and you think about just like the math on that, let's keep it easy. Let's say, it's a 1% margin kind of business. If I give money to 100 people like you and, I'm 99% right, I've made $0. You need to be more than 99% right. And if I don't have data and stats on all this kind of stuff, you have this terrible cold start problem. And what was so fascinating about the corporate card segment was the loss rates at players like American Express were like 0.1%.
Significantly less.
Significantly less. In maybe, consumers, if you have kind of risky populations, can be like like 5+%, right? And so it was a very different place. And so you could constrain the problem quite a bit. Right. And by the way, there was ways where you could, just like a Paribus connected to people's Gmail, you could connect to someone's bank account and see how much money is there. And so you could actually
de-risk it even further potentially.
Exactly. And so we were able to constrain the problem such that you could effectively box out a lot of the early risk questions.
Mm-hmm.
You could control for it if you were sufficiently careful.
Right.
And you could start to obsess over the question we were most interested in, which is like, could you have a card that had some software that would help you spend less, or some software that would help you like get a receipt and close your transaction faster?
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think what I want to touch on as well is the way you went about this, right? Like, I think it's fascinating that you basically decided to become a consultant for customers, right? Like you just said, hey, we're not going to actively fundraise just yet. Like we're actually going to go and focus on, hey, Eric, I want to work for you for free. This is sort of the idea we have. Like, can we just help you, right?
Yeah.
Like I think more companies probably should start out that way. What, during that process, like, because you're iterating so quickly in a very complex field, like I imagine, I know you had the vision early on already, but like the product roadmap probably iterating on that early on. Like how was that experience of talking to all those customers and having hundreds of conversations with CEOs, CFOs, and early teams to really discover like, okay, this is actually what we need? Because I think you talked about, I think you had your first transaction on the Visa network or, within 60 days.
Yeah.
And you realized that needed to be done quickly because of these conversations. Like what things or what process more so can other founders sort of learn from, hey, just go talk to these people and be obsessed about what their problems are and make them your problems?
So, one of the things very uncomfortable about like starting a business is like you have to make trade-offs. You have to say no to people. You need to negotiate all the time.
Yep.
And it's very unnatural for like people who grow up to be nice and like please people.
Back to the retail example, it's like, oh, it's less expensive, or I guess.
You never want to say no to people, right? And I remember like one of my very first jobs, this is way before Ramp, and I'll get to the point. Like one of my very first jobs, I had accepted it, but something changed. There was this other opportunity I couldn't pass up.
Right.
And I was like terrified of like telling like the person who I had signed and committed to go work to, that I was going to go I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And someone gave me this advice, which is like, hey, this clearly means a lot to you. This person cares about you. And obviously like this is bad, this will create some issues for you to not go. Mm-hmm. Instead of going in and saying what you've done and explaining all the reasons, and it's very standoffish, you know what you're going to do, but why don't you just ask him for his advice?
Yeah.
Just tell him like this, like what happened. You respect his opinions a lot. You're trying to figure it out, but this new opportunity you feel like could be life-changing, explain all the reasons. Mm-hmm. If they're really a mentor of yours,
they'll say, go for it.
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
And it shifted. It turned out that was one of the best conversations I'd ever had in my life to that point, where it shifted what I thought was going to be like the most awful. And I was totally a wreck, like stressed out about having this conversation to like, I learned a ton. That person's like a great mentor, even like since. And, it became this useful thing of when you actually have a big decision to make, or maybe real conflict, actually just like treating people as an equal, or maybe as someone that you like want to learn from. Like give that respect to go and ask them what they think. And you'd often be surprised. People want what's best for other people. Most people want to help other people. And in the context of early customer conversations, people in a different form fall into that same trap. They fall into, I'm a salesperson and I need revenue.
I'm not going to talk about everything. I'm going to just hide it and hope to sell this thing and figure it out.
They sort of think on the first order of like, I need to grow revenue by 10%.
Right.
I have 10 minute meetings and I need to get sales from one. And so you go into every single meeting of, will you buy my product? Or I'd like to sell you this product.
Yeah.
And people know that dynamic. People don't like to get sold to.
Yeah.
You kind of know how that goes.
Yeah.
We ask people for their advice. And there's this funny saying, I think in the venture world, if you ask somebody for money, or if you ask somebody for money, you're going to get advice. If you ask somebody for advice, maybe you'll get money.
Yep.
Yeah. And like, that's kind of true of early customer sales. If we're like, hey, we have this idea for a card that will help businesses spend less money. I always, as a business owner, wanted to spend less money. We know a lot about savings. Mm-hmm. Are there places in your business you feel like you're spending more money than you want to? And you actually, through that process, you learn a lot. Mm-hmm. How does a business really work?
Right.
What's the psychology? Where is their pain real or not?
Yeah.
And But more importantly, you kind of change to, you and I are on like kind of different sides of the table to like, let me just slide over.
Let's tackle this problem together.
Yeah, let's tackle this problem together. I want to help you. And well, you're already there. You can go out there and help them. And they say, well, if you go and do this, maybe I'll try this. And so, it turns out most founders don't need, at least in the early days, funds would help, but more revenue would help even more.
Yeah.
This is a great way to do that, which turns out helps you raise more funds. And so we did this, which was useful. I also think it was helpful too, of like, you have a sense of your idea, but like, even if you're like I think about baseball, like, okay, the best batters out there like hit 30 to 40% of their time. And if you can hit 40%, of times at bat, you're one of the greatest of all time, full stop, which is amazing for someone who doesn't get a hit 60% of the time.
Yeah.
And that's probably about right in building products. You can have amazing intuition, but it really takes time, especially if you're trying to build a workflow that automates. Like, you're being able to guess what people's workflow is much harder than if you go and talk to them. And so if you actually just talk to like 50 to 100 people, you start going from like good intuitions to like, oh, I'm hearing this in 30, 40 conversations. And actually these companies all look the same, which allows you to build a great product for a certain set of people where you can be 10 times better.
Yeah.
That's why you do it.
You're getting more at bats, and thereby you're also increasing the conversion of amounts you're hitting. You're not just swinging and hoping.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I wrote down $1 saved is 100x better than the reward point earned. Like, you've got these great sayings.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. I think also the fact that, during that pitch, I imagine, again, back to your point of Paribus and this idea of trust. I think one thing you guys say is like, we don't care about being your first card, we care about being the last card.
Yes.
Like, I think that philosophy is built into like the first days of Ramp, exactly also through the process in which you launched.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, in some of it too was just like, it was necessary because you got to remember, like, some people thought we were a few years late to it. Like, Amex's been around since 1850, right? We always thought we were like over 100 years late to the credit card bow, right? And all these companies were giant. These aren't this isn't a rat race of little startups trying to win you over. And so I think if we tried to do what so many companies were trying to do at the time, and like, I don't know, was it Peter who said it? Competition is for losers, but it just is like, we were going to get shredded if we were trying to give people bigger sign-up bonuses or be more compelling and compete head on. But somehow no one really was trying to cater to building a better product people would switch for. People just assumed no one would switch. And we found a much less competitive market there than I think others realized. Yeah,
that's fascinating. That's awesome. There's something to be said there for bigger industries being more addressable than you think if you just really focus on solving people's problems.
For sure.
I want to talk a little bit about, you guys have grown rapidly. You're still growing rapidly now. I want to talk a little bit about the first. I don't know if this was the first investor meeting you had, but the one with Keith Raboy. I think that one, first of all, people should look up, like, the way you guys got that meeting was through Fortnite.
This is true.
That's hilarious. But talk to me a little bit about that meeting. Like, you and Kareem fly out to New York to talk to Keith, and you get the investment that day. What was that like?
Oh my! I mean, it's what was that like? I actually think it was a very wonderful and different, but if meetings go like this, it's probably a good meeting with an investor. So it was early, and actually I went there because Keith used to be the COO of Square. He was very involved in the Square card and knew a lot about payments. And so we wanted
worst case scenario, I can learn something probably from this guy.
That was the goal. And so we didn't have a deck. We sent an email of like, here's what we're working on, the problem, the team, the progress we made today. And I came with a bunch of questions, and actually my goal was just to learn stuff awesome. and have it be really useful. And it led to it was a really fun conversation because you're going back and forth, kind of explaining. And it shifted very quickly from, I'm trying to convince you, to like, he's like, this makes a lot of sense. He's trying to convince, and we're like figuring these problems out. Who would we go after together? How do we do this? And one, it was fun. It was like this interesting way of figuring out, actually, this person who I've read about, know about, it might be fun to work together. But I think for him, I actually think most investors actually desperately want to find a company they can fall in love with and invest, and are trying to find reasons to say yes. And sometimes people view the pitch process as like, I'm going to tell you all the reasons and I'll have an answer to everything. So you'll find no reasons to say no, and you'll be there. And it's like, it's sort of the opposite. And we were basically, I mean, I guess presented as such, but just I had a business that was like every week we solved different problems. The prize seemed big enough. We had a unique and different way of going at it. And Keith saw, like, he knew it also was why him, because he could uniquely help us. And that was true. But this was something of like, not only do I want to play my capital, but actually, if I invest in this team, I think he felt this, that he could also make this business radically more successful, and it felt more like a partnership. And so it was a very fun meeting, but I don't think it resembled a typical pitch meeting.
No, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's, it's sort of early to your point of sales, right? Like, I imagine most pitchers are probably like, hey, we're just trying to convince them. And, I don't want to tell them everything. I don't want to tell them about the things that aren't going great. Like, I'm just trying to convince them to give me money. It's like, let's actually put you on the same side of the table and let's sort of address this problem together and sort of see if it's even a match. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
That's awesome. I mean,
it's kind of like dating too. Like it's one of those of like, we've all been there, either like it's been us doing it or receiving it, of like, you try too hard, right? It's
Story
like,
of my life.
We've been there, and you're like, oh, I'm less interested, but somehow they're not interested, and you're like, can't help it, kind of a thing. Like maybe there's something similar. Anyway,
it's like when you reject Capital One, like, well, actually, guys, we're super interested.
Like it turns out, whether you're working or personal, people are the same people. Like emotions are real.
Yeah, definitely. That's fascinating. That's awesome. Let's keep the theme of how quickly you guys have grown at Ramp.
Yeah.
This is crazy, by the way. Some of these numbers are bonkers. By the end of the first year, you guys had 100 million in transaction volume. That's an insane number. Like, I can't even fathom how much that is. First of all, I'm very curious from your perspective. Like, it's 2020, shit's hitting the fan, right? And at the same time, you've got this company that has insane product market fit. Like, what was that aspect like of growing a company during that phase? And then just in general, like the quickness with which you guys grew.
2020 was a crazy year.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. I mean, one, so we launched on February 12th, 2020 in New York. And the next week, we've been on this like almost year long bender. And so people were really exhausted after you finally, pass the ribbon, you're out. And I think half the office was like sick a week or two later.
Just made it.
And 3 weeks later, everyone was sick, and the whole city shut down. And turned out some early members did, in fact, have COVID.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, especially given, there was no kind of financial crises quite like it, where you could have businesses weren't doing well,
right?
But there really wasn't a precedent in modern history where like all businesses in a city closed.
Yeah.
And revenue went to zero.
Just no one.
No one.
Yeah.
It was very binary. So that was scary. You get to learn, what extending, 30 days of capital really meant.
Yeah.
But two, like when you kind of think about this whole question of building a breakout business, it's how do you outflank competition? It was one of those unintentionally incredible blessings of like maybe the largest player in the credit card space, which was our first product, American Express. One of their undeniable advantages was they had an amazing points program that you could go use and book for amazing trips.
Yeah.
You could use that card at the airport and show people, and you get access to an amazing lounge.
Yep.
You could flex on people, go to dinner and say, look at my heavy black
throw it out
card. Yeah. Like throw it out. And like, not in April of 2020.
Can't do that. No one's going to dinner.
Not for any. No one's doing this kind of stuff. And so suddenly, not only were folks defanged, but that the game radically changed.
Yeah.
Savings went from a nice idea to necessary.
I actually need money
to keep people on payroll, coupled with everyone was operating remotely.
Yeah.
You suddenly needed this process that you could handle. When you can't pass the card around the office or go ask the boss for the card number, like how do you safely give people like a virtual card that they could go use? How do you get a receipt for all this kind of stuff? And so it caught everyone flat-footed we just move faster. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Talk about moving fast and the days calendar at Ramp. I think that's something very unique you guys have. I know you've talked about this a little bit, so we don't have to go too in depth, but I think it's very important we talk about.
So the people are notoriously bad at valuing their own time. And that's not unfair, right? When you're, prior to, an hour of my time working at Express being worth $8.50 an hour, I thought it was worth zero.
Right. I'm just happy they're paying me.
And it is hard to undo and forget what you've learned for 20 plus years in many people's cases, that actually time is money. Going to a 50,000 person company was very jarring. Yeah. People would be like, well, we need to have a meeting, and people want to be in the meeting. And before you know it, you have a 100-person meeting. And if you do the math,
that's a lot of money.
That it could be like a 50 grand meeting. When you start looking at like the length of time, how many people are there? And, on top of that, we were, I remember it was like a moment of, we were a 7-person company competing against companies with 70,000 people. Even if I worked pretty hard, but even if I worked like, let's say all of us worked 100-hour weeks and we were 2.5x, it'd be like, great, our 7 people are equivalent to, 30 person out, even some crazy thing. If you were more
still
productive,
a huge discrepancy.
You can't do it, right? But if you sort of think about, there are certain, the world's not linear. It can be very exponential. There's certain things which isn't twice as good, but have 100x the impact.
Right.
And so
it's hard to think.
The question was, how could you get people to sort of ask, what are the activities that are 100x, 10x, 1x, and how do you say no? And if you count the days, it forces that question.
Yeah.
And it was very useful for our early team, but now like there's more than 1,000 people at Ramp. This is amazing and a lot of skill sets, but it is like a cultural invitation to say, like, I'm going to say no to this thing. In fact, I have to say no to this meeting because there's something that matters so much more. And so it gives people the permission to do this.
Yeah, it's like a forcing function. Like we have this shared culture. I can actually say no, and here's why. And like that's actually the right thing to do. Yeah. I love this. This is Benjamin Franklin quote. I think I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like, time is what life is made up of. So don't squander it. Right? Yeah. It's like literally. Yeah. It's the stuff of life.
For sure, it's true. It's in some sense is all we have.
Yeah. Literally. Yeah. Amazing. So you're growing very quickly. This is a very dumb question that I was very curious about. I'm like, you've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm just very curious. Like, you do a $300 million raise in 2021. What was that thought process like of raising the money? Like, why did you do it? And then the dumb question is, what does that feel like? Like this responsibility, like hundreds of millions now in the bank. How do we spend that responsibly?
Well, let's take that one. We had worked our way up to it, but I think so. There were a lot of people who raised a lot of money at all kinds of,
especially during that time,
awesome valuations in 2021. Everyone raised at those, raised a lot of money. Some people spent it just as fast. You don't have to spend it just as fast. And so I think back to our ethos, it's like, how do you make every dollar and every hour go further? We raised the money in part because we saw there were going to be great uses, but like we were still obsessive over making sure that our burn was very low. Right. And so unlike a lot of folks who just deployed it right out of the door, we had it. Still, we have, the vast majority of dollars we've ever raised are still on our balance sheet.
That's phenomenal.
And so what I would say is like part of why we did it in some sense is, it both creates a sense of inevitability every time you can very outwardly tell the company is doing well. Yep. Some of it's capital, but also you had some of the largest firms on the planet who really cared, who were putting real skin in the game, really getting aligned to go grow it. And we sell to other companies and there was benefits and everything like that could help. But also too, like, in some sense, when you're 0 days old, it's like super obvious. All companies is a collection of people. When you have, you're trying to convert like resources into productive time, into bringing talent into the company. And when you have those, I think it gives people the confidence to say, like, I'll be there. I'll come. This company is going to be around, stand the test of time, so I can move my business over to it.
Right.
So I should make the leap. Exactly. I should go and leave this giant safe company job to go here and take something that maybe people would find risky and make it feel not risky. And so those were some of the reasons that we did it, and have the wherewithal to say, like, I don't, I think sometimes without it, sometimes you need to make decisions that if the whole ethos is, I want to create an incredible amount of value for our customers, and give, and take very little, I think this gave us the space to say, we're going to invest way more in the customer experience. And to make it really real, like, we were looking at, even today in 2025, what percentage of Ramp's payroll is going towards R&D, research and development, engineering, working on making the existing products better or building the next products.
Right.
54%. In software, average and good is considered to be about 15%. This is software.
All sales and marketing.
Exactly. And so we're spending many multiples more, in part because when you raise the capital, you can afford to have a much longer term view.
Right.
And I think that's good. I think that's part of why Ramp is so beloved. Why every customer uses says it's gotten better every year.
Yeah. And actively investing in that.
Because we are. And I think that's part of why we're growing faster, to your earlier point, than others. Customers, they can feel it.
I think so. I mean, I think it's everywhere. Like, just the amount of things you guys are shipping and the culture, it's very, very present, even for someone who doesn't live in the US. It's like these guys are shipping.
Yeah. That's cool.
Part of that investment in the tech team and the research, etc., you guys have some pretty interesting internal stuff you've built. I want to talk a little bit about Toby, the AI bot you guys made. Like, I think that's a great example of how you guys are adopting AI and just tech in general. And I'd love to ask you if there are any other fun things you've used, like small AI driven projects, like the Midjourney thing. Like, I want to touch about that a little bit because I think it's very unique.
Oh, for sure. All right, so let's do Toby. We can talk about, like, the love and hate channels, and we can also talk about Superbowl, because it relates to the Midjourney part of it.
Perfect.
Toby was this really interesting thing for us, right? So one of the problems, so there are a lot of great marketers out there in the world, a lot of great salespeople out there in the world, good engineers, all this kind of stuff. They might have great functional skills, but it takes a long time for them to develop taste and understand, like, what do customers think?
Right.
And even if you care about this, I mean, maybe you and I can listen at 2x speed or whatever on podcasts, but it takes time to actually learn, figure out what's relevant. One of the unique qualities of a large language model is, it can read, it can listen to every podcast. It can read every customer review. It can go into every transcript. And so, our applied AI team had this idea of, what if there was a digital teammate who's done that. Every time a call comes in, gets decomposed down into a transcript, it reads all of it, and you can say, "Hey, Toby, I'm in an active deal process against Concur. What do people prefer about Ramp over Concur?" Toby can ask every single customer, can read every single transcript, and come back, and it can cite every single transcript. And it turns out, actually, like, you can build that actually in like a weekend. If you know what you're doing, which is amazing, right? And this sort of thing. But we had this like amazing new technology how to go build. So Toby is one of the most, not a real teammate, but he's very beloved. Complains
the least.
Complains the least, and all this kind of stuff. There's a similar channel too of actually, you can do sentiment analysis. So one of the most popular channels in Ramp is kind of the Gong Love channel. And actually, if you're doing kind of like, different research and you're trying to talk about how happy customers are and why they are, an LLM is listening for like the happiest highs of highs, different moments, which you can just pull out these amazing stories that people hear but don't tell everyone else at. And it's just like this constant stream. maybe more important, and actually in some senses an even more rabid following, is the hate channel, which actually you can find people who are having a really bad time. And it's much rarer, but you know, one of the problems with big companies is, as they get bigger, is that, you know, no one wants to tell you bad news. People want to handle it. They want to take care of it and solve the problem.
Don't tell anyone about it.
You know, and it's not that it's malicious. It's more of like, you know, people want to show they can go and take care of it. And so you can have issues that don't make it back into your product is confusing and you should fix it to like real problems. An LLM, you know, doesn't take it personally.
Like, hey, these are the facts, man.
Post it and everyone can see it and we can learn, and actually like problems tend to be problems for a lot less time. So that's really good. And so I think there's certain attributes of like large models that can read and simply like, you know, we have constraints of our context windows. Like we can't, I can only take in information, so much information at such a speed, but you can break that down now. Midjourney, Superbowl. So I'm going to pause you one sec. I want something you said before is, don't look to like to earlier idea of how do you find great company ideas. Like, don't look for new tech and figure something out. Like, actually look at the problems instead. I think this is a great example of you guys. Not just saying where can we use AI, but like, hey, our sales pitches, like how can we improve them? Like, oh, this is where things are going wrong. Oh, we can use tech to help, but it's not necessarily looking for tech. So there is this meme, by the way, online of like someone tweets at Ramp and like a few hours later it's like done. Right. So I mean, maybe that's part of why across the ocean you're like hearing about Ramp that like iterates really quickly, but like it's actually this really interesting quality of like. Most big companies, like you put an idea in an idea box and it'll never happen. But small companies, one of their advantages is they live and breathe and can obsess over their customers, and you know, they'll make mistakes, but they can improve faster. And that is a quality into its own self. So we started to figure out how could we just design that into our culture, like full stop all the way through. And like, you know, actually just in some sense sort of thinking about, you know, designing to pull up signal from noise really quickly and then have ability to ship things fast, like creates its own brand quality of simply improving faster than anyone else. And so why wouldn't you? You know, if you're, why not partner with people who simply care more about your business and your problems than anyone else? I actually think is rightfully so pretty compelling.
Yeah, that's a moat in and of itself. Yeah, awesome. All right, sorry, I cut you off Midjourney. Let's talk about Midjourney.
So there's lots of factors, like there's lots of interesting cases you talk about LLMs to like find things that maybe you wouldn't find. Like another example of it is I think it speeds up the creative process, right? You have, you know, salespeople who can be more personalized. You have engineers who can write, you know, better code faster, all this kind of stuff. This is true of creatives too. So something we did probably about half a year ago was move a lot of marketing actually into our, you know, to report to Kareem, our CTO. And our view is actually marketing is being this increasingly technical function. You can use data to understand who you're talking to, what do they care about, do things at scale. And that's a bit of a data organization and infrastructure problem. But also like computers can generate videos, which are like pretty good. Make really good sound, do all kinds of stuff. And you can actually have like a much faster pace of iteration. And where this kind of becomes real is 11 days before the Super Bowl, someone thought to ask, should we do a Super Bowl ad? And we had some relationship that was developing with Saquon Barkley, who I think he's going to prove to be an amazing, you know, not just one of the greatest running backs of all time, but I think has the make potentially be one of the greatest investors to come out of sports, but was really interested in Ramp. And, you know, he said, okay, I'm in. We'd have to film in just a few days on Saturday. You'd have an hour, go. And we're like, okay,
figure it out.
He's going to be in the Super Bowl. He's incredible. We think they're going to win. We should do this. Normally, if you want to go and come up with concepts, it takes a lot of time, scripts. It's hard to know visually how it would work. We started using Midjourney, and we had created functionally hundreds of variants that we could not only go and see, but just watch.
Like, do we even like this?
Do we like this? We use Runway. Like, you know, 11 Labs, like go and create like the audio and see this. And it meant that by the time we were shooting, you could compress what would have been months of work and research and everything into days.
And
produce, you know,
it was great. I liked it.
You know, it worked.
Yeah.
It was an amazing hit, but
what results did you see? By the way, I think to your point of marketing is more technical. Like this is a great example of that. What kind of results did you see from, like, what results do you get from a Super Bowl ad?
I mean, it was the biggest month we've ever had.
Yeah.
Right. Which is wild for a company that normally has like a month sales cycle, right?
Yeah.
Like, the relevance, I mean, it's one of the only moments where 100+ million people, are all watching it
At the same exact time.
and they're watching the ads.
Yeah.
Most people don't watch the ads.
No.
You know, and so, it was, there are a lot of ways to cut it, but, I mean, like, if you just go on the metrics, like, we're happy.
Very good.
We're happy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Let's keep talking a little bit about marketing. I think you've got some I wrote this down. I think you're one of the clearest thinkers when it comes to marketing. And I think there's a lot of things founders can learn from how you approach marketing.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch about that you guys do uniquely is you guys use internal data not only to improve the product, but also for marketing reasons. Like you guys recently brought on an economist,
Yes.
and you guys have had these benchmark reports. I think there are probably a lot more companies that could use the information they have to share and tell a very compelling story. You've said storytelling isn't about your marketing message, it's about what's actually interesting to people. And I think that example of hiring an economist and telling that data in an interesting way is an example of that. What can founders do a better job of in the early days or at a lot later stage, sort of internalizing that sort of thesis?
That's a really good question. I mean, so one, I think that the overall framing is correct. It's like, again, remember, no one gives a shit about what you're doing.
Yeah.
The world is busy. There's other products. Like, why should,
Yeah.
is this question of in an inexpensive world, how do you live rent free in people's head? Is maybe one way of articulating it. And, I think being interesting, being useful, being funny,
Yep.
being shareable, these are all kind of things that have appeal. And, you know, I think one of the, you know, we obsess over customers. We talk with them a lot. And I think one of the questions we always get from finance team members is like, you know, am I running my business the right way? What do other businesses do? What are people spending on? What's growing really quickly?
Right.
What tools are my company paying for that actually, like, maybe we shouldn't? And it turned out we had this amazing data set, which, you know, be thoughtful from a privacy perspective, but you could actually go and have real intuition about like what actually were the tools that companies were finding incredible value
Right.
in, and others might too.
Yeah, that they just don't know about.
That they just don't know about. A lot of people, like, you know, even in like recently, everyone is thinking about AI, but
Where do you start? What tools? What's even popular? What's trusted?
exactly, and how well are they? And so when you kind of revert it, and you give your team permission to like stop saying like, okay, you just need to go and like push out this message, and you give people permission to be like, stop obsessing over yourself. Ask, like, for people out in the world, what do they care about?
Yeah.
For
What
customers,
questions are they
for
asking?
people, for journalists, what questions are they asking? And start there. You'll ask more interesting questions. You'll learn, you'll listen, and you might actually find some areas where there's some of both. Actually, you can provide and be useful. People start to learn, form a view, start to form trust, and then later, when they're thinking, you know, I'm ready to modernize. Why am I spending an hour every month doing expense reports? I want to be like the greatest and highest performing companies, you know, of our generation, and, you know, use a first class tool like Ramp. They'll think of you, you know, when you're there. And so that's kind of the principles. Obviously, it takes a lot of work, testing, trying things. You do things, and you'll see what works. But that's sort of why we think about it.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, that thesis, like, you know, obviously you got to go figure it out afterwards. But as long as you have that frame of mind, you'll be able to sort of stumble upon those questions and stumble upon those problems. Yeah, that's awesome. We're gonna start wrapping up a little bit. I know I'm taking a lot of your time.
No stress. Yeah.
One or two more things surrounding the idea of founder advice. Something that stood out to me, and we touched on this a little bit, but when I was looking at how much you just researched before you started Ramp, like you looked at, you know, the entire history of Bank of America, the America Card, like, what can people learn, and what did you learn during that exploratory phase where it's like, you know, I'm going to figure out this industry. Do I even like the industry? Do I even care about the problem? Like, what can founders maybe learn a little bit more about that discovery phase? Like, you've clearly found this problem and now you're just very curious about the industry. Talk to me a little bit about how you went about, you know, researching.
So I couple things. First, I actually think more people will know this about you the more they listen to the podcast. I think your level of research, rigor, care, and knowing and putting in as much time as you have into knowing Ramp is a big part of the reason why I was excited to meet you. And part of why we have like a really good and interesting and much more in-depth conversation than most have. You actually put in the work. When you go and you spend the time on it, you have more interesting conversations later. I'll call you up on different things and you start to get into the mix. Most people go very surface. They don't really get very obsessive. And I think if you read a lot of biographies of different founders, you listen to the Founders Podcast, you study people, often deep there is some level of obsession about something.
Right.
They simply care more and will do something to get in maybe the top 0.1% of the world at some kind of quality. Yeah. Maybe in the entertainment industry is like Michael Ovitz. Like you know, the way that people talk, like he would list, like, I think by the time he was going out and starting his agency, I think he had watched every single movie that had been nominated for an Academy Award.
No one else.
He knew like the histories of people, what motivated, what were the dynamics that push Hollywood in one way. Yeah. And so if he was meeting and trying to convince you to work with his firm and to go into it, frankly, he just understood the world far better, and it takes a lot of work. But you know what? Like in a world that's competitive, actually, like thinking about what's going to matter is pretty important. And there were interesting structural questions. If I was, I hope that Ramp is the last business I build. I want this to be my life's work. And if you're going to go into an industry and have it be your life's work, you should probably know of how did this industry get here? What is the direction that things are moving in? What made certain companies great? Why did they fall? For the companies that fell out of favor. And, some of it's very interesting. Some of the books are boring, but like it starts to, if the challenge is how can you create something different, new, and better into the world, if you don't understand like the shape of where you sit outside of it, if you can't, some people are lucky, but like it allows you to get to insights faster the more you know. And so very in favor of deep research.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you just got this insane level of context that you can start pulling from and start recognizing problems potentially, and see pitfalls where you're like, hey, we shouldn't do this because this is how it's done usually in the industry, and there's no point of going down this route, or we should maybe think about it a bit differently. That's fascinating. I want to end off by repeating something you said that I think is very, very interesting. You said this is a truism. You said, do right by people, make your service better, and be diligent and listen to your customers, to your customer problems. Those are timeless truisms. Yeah. Do you want just a real quick comment on that? But I think that's a beautiful place to end with, because I think if anybody listens and they just focus on that, they'll probably have gotten a ton of value from just listening to this.
I love that. Look, like I think sometimes when people try to learn about Ramp, people come and they say, like, tell me the secret. What did you figure out? Yeah, what happened? What was that
What you drink?
Exactly, like that made this work. Like, what is that one weird trick that doctors hate? Like that, made the thing work. And sometimes people are very disappointed when, I say, we just took simple ideas really seriously and just did it for a long time. Yeah. And we're consistent about it.
That's amazing.
It is a timeless idea that people would like to get more things with less. Yep. Less money, less work, less effort. Everyone knows it. Extraordinary businesses have been built on it. And it was this powerful idea that no one was taking seriously in one of the largest industries. Yeah. We just took it seriously. We count the days. Anyone can do it. Yeah.
You just do it.
You just do it. Yeah. You look at how much did we get done? Great. Let's just try to get a little bit more done every day. Yeah. People talk about customer obsession. Maybe it's on a bunch of companies' walls. How many customer calls did you listen to today? How many did you go and meet?
Are you really customer obsessed, or are you just saying that?
It's like, I often find the people who were so great at their craft are actually just like, just doing.
They just care more. They're just more diligent.
They care more. They're more diligent. They're serious about that. And so, no, I think, maybe almost to where we had started earlier, to that Steve Jobs quote of, world's people who are, no smarter than you. I think that's right. But a lot of people who built the world really cared.
Yeah.
You know, they were really consistent.
They might not have been smarter, but they cared more.
They were determined. And, you know, I think if you're trying to go out and create companies, take that idea seriously, and they'll be off to the races.
Amazing. Eric, this was awesome. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I think that's a wrap. That's the pod.